So think an economy booming at more than 4% is big. President Trump says think bigger, think double that. You heard me right, double. Forget 4 something, try 8 something, maybe more. If he succeeds at doing something most of his critics say he can't. But the president tells Sean Hannity, oh yeah, he can. And why Republicans are saying, keep talking, Mr. President, because even if we don't get there, we do get this, that blue wave. Suddenly it's not looking so blue. When you hear from a top Democrat who agrees and has a message for his leaders. Then the farmer who is losing patience with all leaders, Brian Duncan, doesn't much care which party is taking bows because he just seems to keep on taking hits from a trade war that's getting worse. And you're seeing a lot of this, protesters screaming that Trump policies are tearing families apart. But not so much of this, a soft-spoken factory worker and others declaring that their policies are saving their families. We have one here. And don't think things can get much worse for Facebook or Twitter. What if I told you what ails them could be contagious? And let's just say you might not like this, but you do need to hear this. All of this. Because if it matters to you, my friends, it matters to us when the markets are open and even on a day like Saturday when they are not. It is what we do, so let's do this now. It's another busy week in America. Let's get to it. All right, it's not a bad indictment to say we could never do it and then to say it would never last if we did do it. That's kind of the conundrum that we're in with an unexpectedly strong GDP report for the second quarter. Now, having said that, it wasn't the off-the-charts expectation that some had. So, again, the hand-wringing and second-guessing on all of this. Welcome, everybody. I am Neil Cavuto. Let's get the read on what that was all about, what the fuss was all about, and how the markets dealt with everything in between. Let's go to what I call Jolton Bolton. Deirdre Bolton of Fox Business. I'm marketing that. I'm patenting that because she deserves that. Okay. Tell us what happened.
So, Neil, that 4.1% headline, it got rave reviews. The U.S. is now a $20 trillion plus economy. So that's the first time a country has ever hit that milestone. So let's go through some of the data. That's the headline. But some of the strongest parts came from net exports. So you had these recent trade actions by the Trump administration pushing up prices for some U.S. goods. So steel, aluminum, 2 examples. China also bought a lot of soybeans before the tariff tiffs went into effect. So basically, China went on a soybean buying spree. And that's where you see this 1% jump, because soybeans are the U.S. biggest export crop, worth $20 billion last year, according to the USDA. So this component added 1 whole percentage point to that headline 4.1%. Consumer spending, that was the second strongest part, and you're going to see there up around 4%. 2/3 of our economy, right, is us spending, businesses spending. So this really moved the needle. This was the first full quarter that investors could see the effects of the Trump administration's tax plan, the one that, of course, was voted into place last year in December. So American consumers, they felt like they had more money in their pockets. They bought new cars. They went on vacations. The question, of course, is this kind of growth sustainable going forward? A lot of economists doubt it. Ian Shepherdson is one, Pantheon Macroeconomics. He cites a years-long slowdown in productivity that may curb economic growth. And then, of course, since tariffs have been imposed, he and other economists say, look, that creates an unknown factor in the future of export numbers. Other economists talk about the tax cuts as a short-term sugar rush for American consumers, and they say it's really not clear if people are going to spend in the future as they did during that second quarter. Now, after the report, President Trump addressed the issues of sustainability. He predicted annual growth of 3% or better, emphasis on better, for the rest of the year. Here's the president.
In the second quarter of this year, the United States economy grew at the amazing rate of 4.1%. And I will say this right now, and I'll say it strongly, as the trade deals come in one by one, we're going to go a lot higher than these numbers.
So, Neil, most economists, if you look at on average, what they are expecting, it seems to be 2.5% through the end of 2019. And just worth noting, that is still higher than the 2% that we've been tracking for the past few years.
But we should hasten to add that these are the same economists who missed this, right?
Yes, indeed.
It is what it is. All right, thank you very much, Deirdre Bolton. Now to that remark the president made to our Sean Hannity, that he thinks that if you think this is off the charts, how about 8 or 9% GDP? He says he could do that by having the trade deficit right now, hence his argument that this trade war back and forth on tariffs will have a benefit to this country longer term. But think of that. You do that, all of a sudden you get the economy booming at double the rate it boomed in the second quarter. Let's get the read from Jonas Max Ferris. We've also got Jessica Tarloff here, Gary Kaltbaum here. Gary, what do you think of that? Is that doable?
From his mouth to God's ears, that's all I can tell you. I don't think so. And it's not because the number's too high. It's because we're just too big. At $20 trillion, tough to grow at 8%. But I got to tell you, we'll continue to take 4% as far as the eyes can see. That is a big number. That'll keep unemployment down. It'll keep the markets in good stead. And I got to tell you, at 4%, nothing bad happens. Let's hope it continues.
You know, Jonas, his argument has been, look, if business investment picked up to the tune of 7 or 8%, consumer spending picked up a like amount, you can extrapolate that out and make a convincing argument for, at the very minimum, significantly higher than the growth we experienced. But all things would have to align, right?
And Trump would have to be able to borrow from the Treasury and build Trump hotels in every single state in one quarter. That's what it would take.
Every other state.
He's been a little hyperbolic. You can't really get to that growth rate, although there are some things going on that could lead to continued fast growth above what economists estimate. The Federal Reserve is not raising rates because of the trade war as much as they probably would. That is in itself a stimulus because there really hasn't been that big of a drag from it. You are getting this like hurricane effect where people are doing deals before these tariffs that may never really escalate to the level people are scared about.
You would do your deals as aggressively as you can, get product out the door as aggressively as you can. That would lift these numbers.
This is not sustainable for many years, but if you wanted to get another hot quarter, scare people into doing business in this next quarter before the election, keep interest rates artificially low because you're worried about this trade thing. And then I'll tell you, look, the trade war in theory could lead to a lot of people putting factories here to avoid tariffs. That gets an economic boom to America. It's not a good plan to do that long term.
Well, here's where I would part company with that. And Jessica, there are many anomalies here with every quarter, and Gary reminds us over the many years we've chatted, that you could explain this freak event versus another. But one thing that was a constant, and in this report, unexpected, the consumer spending component, the tick up there that was 4 times what it was in the first quarter, that goes apart from trade. That tells you that even in the face of higher gas prices, you could make an argument, anemic wage growth, Americans were predisposed to get busy. So I'm wondering what that could portend.
Well, that has to do with the tax cuts, right? Or at least that would be the argument that the administration would be making, that you have somewhere between $1,000 and $4,000 back in, average Americans.
Then why weren't they doing that in the first quarter?
I don't know. Maybe they were waiting to see how it shakes out. I mean, the tax cuts were a new thing. They didn't come into effect until February. I think it's more of a wait and see, and I think that's really how. I mean, I'm not a financial analyst like these two gentlemen or like Jolton Bolton over there.
Sell yourself short, young lady, but I'll go ahead.
But as a political analyst, I would caution everyone who's saying, this isn't sustainable or this is about to explode or it's going to go to 7 or 8%, which just sounds totally crazy town to me. If we've been at kind of 2-3% for a while, and I think the president is right to say if I can, oversee a 3% growth economy for my 4 years in office, fingers crossed, just 4, that's going to be a very successful.
No, by the way, we might just say to explain that he's talking about 3% for a year, which is something we haven't done in better part of a decade. Your thoughts?
We're talking because of this can happen. The psyche of American business has changed. I am constantly speaking to CEOs and small business owners. They feel differently. They feel like they have the wind at the back instead of the wind in their face.
Even with the trade stuff.
Even with the trade stuff. Even with the president going after Amazon. There's some things I don't like that he does. But they just feel like that the government is finally on their side, has moved out of their way to a certain extent. Yeah. And if we can continue that way, if we can lower taxes, less regulation, regulations. That is huge. And the reason why is we were going the opposite way for 8 years. Business did not know on a daily basis what was next to hit. And when we talk about Obamacare, that mandate was some big stuff to small and medium-sized
So even a little uptick here. I mean, we do know one thing, whether it's an anomaly or not, it is going to improve the average for the year and make it easier to get the 3%, Jonas. Yeah. Then what?
I don't want to overplay the anomaly and the soybean sales, but look, I think there's a little more going on in here.
Soybeans is where I live, yeah.
I mean, it's a $20 trillion economy. How many soybeans are we selling? But I will say, I think we are all underestimating, maybe because I have an MBA, I don't have a psychology degree. People's mentality, more than companies, I think, has changed. And it could be irrational. They were needlessly pessimistic during the Obama years. Maybe they're irrationally optimistic now. They're buying this whole 80s America Great thing. There really is no tangible policy that explains why people would all of a sudden, think the world's going to grow 8% a year again. But if they believe it...
But optimism is up. People happy about their own economic prospects and their kids is better than it was, right?
The consumer is more optimistic than the businesses, I think, unlike what Gary says. Even though the companies got more of the tax cut, doesn't matter. They are optimistic people. And he's a good salesman. No president's ever hyped the economy like this guy, like he's selling a hotel.
But corporations did do well under Obama. And Jonas, you mentioned in your opener, there has been anemic wage growth, which is an issue. And the deficit is a huge issue.
As there was under Barack Obama.
Absolutely. That's not something that has turned around because of President Trump. Right. We have an extra $1 trillion added to the deficit because of these policies. The White House had to revise their predictions there. I mean, there are outstanding issues that used to matter to Republicans. You see Paul Ryan up there, who used to be, the deficit king, and saying, got to roll back those entitlements, make sure we pay attention to this. And now, it's all sunshine and butterflies.
Because damned if he does, damned if he doesn't in your eyes.
Well, by my, yes, to me, certainly. Right. But, I think that people should be honest about what their priorities were and what the realities are, because going forward, the deficit will matter. Entitlement reform will matter. Certainly,
as a liberal or slightly left of center, does it worry you that this president is presiding over an economy that could be picking up steam?
Oh, in terms
yes
of
or no?
elections?
Yes or no?
I mean, no, it's a great thing for Americans.
No, somebody asked, are you worried?
Yeah.
Someone very good. All right. See how easy that was?
Politics.
All right.
Actually, it wasn't that.
We will have much more on this. I do want to get the fallout from a top Democrat, a former Hillary Clinton strategist, among many things. We have Micro Trend Squared bestselling author Mark Penn with us here. Mark, I mean, the rap again, I'm only kidding with Jessica, but from the leadership in the Democratic Party is that this isn't really happening. This isn't really much to write home about, when a lot of people are obviously probably seeing it, acting on it. So what's the risk?
Well, look, in the Harvard Caps Harris poll, which I'm a co-director of, we just came out of the field. We show 70% of Americans before this announcement see that we have a strong economy. That number is one of the most significant changes in the last year and a half. So the public is seeing the economy grow. Trump has about a 55% approval on the economy, but only a 41% approval personally, or to give you one more number, 45% overall job approval, a little bit below what he would really need to prevent Democrats, I think, from taking the House.
All right, well, let's explore that a little bit, because being in 2014, the midterm election, Barack Obama's last midterm election, the economy was doing very, very well. Unemployment was already cut dramatically down, I think from 7.8%. At that point, we were closing in on 5%, ultimately finishing at 4.8%. Yet Democrats ended up losing seats, more than a dozen. And I'm wondering why that happened, and whether it's not always the economy, stupid. What do you think?
Well, at that time, despite the improvement in the economy, most people thought the economy hadn't improved. And if you look at Barack Obama's numbers, he started off in the stratosphere, and then his lowest point was actually the midterm election day. Trump has shown a very different pattern. He sort of started, well, we won't say the basement, but maybe the first floor, and he's hovered up from there since then, or come back to that rating, which we've never seen actually a president do that in the first 2 years.
So what could that mean for November? A lot of Republicans I talked to this past week, they've been all saying, well, salivating the idea that a blue wave just isn't going to materialize, that they acknowledge they could very well lose seats, and likely will, in the House, but not the nearly 2 dozen that would flip who controls? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the biggest advantages that Democrats have going into this is that the Republicans jumped ship thinking they were on the Titanic 6 months ago. They have a leader who quit. He doesn't even seem to support Trump's economic policy, and so they have a completely mixed message. Well, the Democrats' biggest problem is the election of socialists at a time that capitalism is making a big comeback and producing numbers on unemployment, food stamps, and social programs that are remarkable. And don't forget what happened in 96 to 98. Unexpected economic growth closed the deficit in a way that not a single economist predicted.
No, you're right. It created a whole boom, the internet boom, and all the money and revenues that came with that. Mark Penn, always good seeing you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, talk about the media and what gets a lot of attention. These protesters shutting down ICE. So not so much attention with a soft-spoken guy who was just telling a story of how some policies helped him get back in life, and his family too. Who connected and why? After this.
This program has allowed me to build on my skills and knowledge in the trade that seems to be declining in the workforce for skilled laborers. I believe this will give the opportunity or give the other options to kids like myself and my brother who may not fit the college mode.
All right, for my money, that young man, Matt Rutsky, talking to the president of Iowa at this jobs event, might have scored and might have had a bigger impact on some of the louder voices you hear, those demanding that ICE be shut down, or actors, actresses, the rest who just rail, because he had a compelling personal story to tell. A lot of people could relate to him. He joins you now, Matt Rutsky, with us. Very good to have you. You had a very compelling personal story where just the experience of graduating from a community college, getting a job, benefited your family, you saw it with your brother, and the president was compelled by what you had to say as well, right?
Yes, I believe so.
So how did you feel when all you were saying is in this environment you have benefited? Was that what you were trying to get across, and that others could do what you did?
Yes. Basically, I was kind of a typical high schooler, didn't know what I wanted to do in life, and luckily I landed a job with a great company and was able to start an apprenticeship to better my life and my family. And I just wanted to congratulate Mr. President on that for doing passing the bill.
And I like what you had to say that college or these 4-year schools aren't for everybody, that sometimes there are different strokes for different folks. Community college and the opportunities it presented and obvious job gains that you've gotten and what's been presented to you, that's very different, right?
Yes. Yep. The 4-year college is not for everyone. And, trade schools are a great way to make money. It's a skilled labor. It's a great future for most people. And I hope that more people enter the workforce in the skilled trade. It's very declined right now, and we're going to be losing a lot due to retirement in the near future.
You got a lot of rave reviews on your performance. How did you feel about that?
I feel pretty humbled about even getting the chance to be able to speak with the president. I guess I haven't seen too many of the reviews. I've been so kind of on cloud nine, just being able to be at the same table with President Trump and be able to at least tell my story and kind of on the behalf of the HVAC world and the trade world that there's more than just 4-year degrees out there and writing 15-page papers.
I think you did a great job, and you were a real person. You are a real person. Best of luck to you and your family. Thank you very, very much. Some perspective. More to this.
Ron.
All right, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, probably not a fan of this, that he lost more than $16 billion after his stock plunged this week because of slower Facebook folks coming on board just to see what the site's all about. Twitter also slumping on kind of the same concerns here, that the number of users that were expected to pile on, well, they're not piling on. And so the selling piled on, and it spread to other sectors. Deirdre Bolton with us, Gary Kalpom, Jonas Max Ferris, and from CFRA Research, Lindsay Bell. It seems like a trend, is it?
Well, I don't know. I think that you are definitely seeing users spend less time, but they're not giving up on social media altogether. I think that, this is a trend that has started. They're more focused on tailored opportunities. Look, Instagram is doing great. LinkedIn, Microsoft said they had the best quarter of all, and engagement is up. So I just think that this is something that they're going to have to work through. The GDPR in Europe is definitely impacting, but over time, I think that individuals are going to continue to use social media.
I thought Instagram would refine the base for Facebook and protect it from this since it owns it, right? And it didn't happen.
It was the deal of the century. It's a good thing they bought them because their core business. Look, these robots are very social. That's what everyone's concerned about. We don't really know how much business they were allowing on Twitter and Facebook that is completely fake. Not just like the Russians buying ads, but like completely fabricated accounts. I mean, it's millions of people on Twitter. And why didn't they deal with this years ago? It's because it was all in their best interest to make money wherever possible.
But do you think that's what happened here? It all caught up with them? Because I was amazed that it didn't hit them earlier.
I think brand name has been heading south. I think wariness is heading north, and that is not good for these type of companies that you're basically paying nothing to be a part of. And the vitriol is beyond at this point in time. And I think we've hit peak for all of them, not necessarily maybe Instagram, but for the whole. And I'd be really careful. As far as affecting other technology, Intel got hit this week big time, and I'm watching a lot of peak earnings in a bunch of places, so I'm watching the NASDAQ real closely because it's leading for a while, and if it breaks, that's not going to be good for markets.
Yeah, are you hearing the break analogy? Because I've heard that too. No, really, look, it's going to start a trend.
Yeah, I mean, what I am hearing is that a lot of these tech stocks are priced for perfection, and it's very rare to find any company in any industry that is run perfectly.
What hurt
and we're
Intel?
beginning
what
to.
Was the issue?
Well, I think it was the forecasting, right?
Okay.
I mean, Intel met expectations, but said they're going to have some delays, production delays on some of their chips. But I think these dramatic responses, Facebook down, 18%, Twitter down 20%. It's just when you do have these stocks that are priced for perfection, and then the companies aren't executing perfectly, you do have this very dramatic reaction. I'm with you, Jonas, on the Instagram thing. Facebook was so smart to buy Instagram when it did. I mean, Instagram by itself would be worth $100 billion now.
Well, like I say, it's not helping. So when you're looking at that,
they have to buy somebody else.
It casts a pall on those who deserve it and those who don't, right?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't even really begun to monetize Instagram, and that's an important thing. And then I would also point out, look at Snapchat's their earnings last quarter, which was ended in May. Their stock went down 20%, just like we're seeing now. User growth, it was down. Outlook was horrible, but the stock came all the way back up. Where else are you going to find growth?
I
think Facebook needs to buy a company.
But think of that, though. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the NASDAQ 100, and you've been richly rewarded with the bumps, never leaving them. Because they always come back, and that's always been the case. Will that still be the case, or no? 2000
things got a little rocky for a few years with an 80% decline. But look, what's very startling isn't that it fell more dollar value.
By the way, you're not saying another 2000 event is on our hands, is it?
There's a possibility in tech, and here's why. What was so amazing isn't that the stock dropped so much. They had revenue growth that was perfection. It was like 50% revenue growth. At this size of a company, that did not happen in 2000. Those companies were falling apart when those stocks came apart. There was no revenue growth. The point here is that the concept of how they're growing the revenue is now under question. And is it just Facebook and now Twitter? Is it Google? The way they've grown revenue at this rate, is that going to just end? Is that you can't do this to people? The government.
Right? Facebook said, okay, we're still going to grow, but it's like going to be in the 30% instead of 40% range for sales.
Yeah, right? But that's enough to kick it in the teeth. You got to remember something. After big runs, all these stocks become over-owned, overloved, and over-leveraged. In the case of Facebook, the stock gapped down all these points, so all these people that want to sell a trap, and the big money crowd just owns $1 billion, $2 billion.
Would you still recommend, let's say that issue now, Facebook?
They're going lower.
Really?
The selling hasn't even started because it gapped down. And I can promise you go from a high growth stock to not so high growth stock. And typically, when you go from 40 to 30, it doesn't stop there. And that's sales growth. You end up going 25, 20 because you got so big, it has to slow down.
But what does that tell you about? This is what Apple used to deal with, right? I mean, you only sold 80 million phones, right. And we expected 82 or whatever, and they punished the stock. Is that justified? Or are the Apples and the Amazons and now Microsoft's the real trendsetters now?
Well, I think there are different pockets within tech that are going to show more growth. Like cloud has been phenomenal this quarter.
Yeah, that was the standout for Amazon.
It was the standout. And you have AI. You have different areas that you need to focus on.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes, exactly.
That's the way I roll.
I think these companies need to buy, to pick up on that point. Facebook needs to pull another rabbit out of
But
its
the easy
mouth.
money is out? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying based on what they have now, I would assume
Those technology companies that are able to move with the times. Microsoft is a cloud company now. They didn't get into that. Microsoft is half the price. So they got the job done with this new CEO who's done a fabulous job the last 3 years. Amazon with all their new products. I mean, Alexa is going to be, already is, but it's going to be monster going forward. Not just necessarily all the deliveries, which, by the way, they're not making money on. They're making money on
So
these
let me flip it
products
around, guys. If investors were to come to you now and say, I still believe in technology, I still believe it's the future, I still want to plunk down, funds, ETFs that mimic, let's say, the NASDAQ 100, what have you, but that group as an aggregate, would you tell them, go ahead?
No, it's overblown because they're launching ETFs that are just social media ETFs, which they should have done 15 years ago, but they did wait until at the end of the run. Look,
would you recommend?
No, because Apple never overindulged on the lack of regulatory oversight.
But Apple's in that group.
These social media companies...
No, not social media. I'm doing
well, they're the ones driving the majority of the growth in NASDAQ at this point. I mean,
Apple's a lot of people who buy technology funds, of which the good and the bad are all.
I wouldn't buy a fund. I would be stock specific.
How about you?
I would be stock specific, and I would, with social media, I would let the dust settle here, but I do think that
I would buy conservative value.
The greatest winners of the next 2 decades will be in technology, but right now I think the timing's a little bit off, and you probably wait. But there is going to be some monstrous new applications and names you have never even heard of 10 years from now. They're going to go up 10, 20, 30-fold, just like we have seen in every decade. It's just a matter of time and patience.
Can you share those names during the break?
I wish I knew.
There's like a 12-year-old building sitting in a garage.
I know, yeah. There's some kid watching us right now. Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, thank you very, very much. In the meanwhile, the president firing Michael Cohen after the release, of course, the tape, the phone call, all this. What happened with this relationship? That's what I want to know. What happened? I feel your pain. All right, so we had the Michael Cohen tapes, and now his charge that the president did know about his son's meeting with those Russians at the Trump Tower. Now, a lot of people who go back and forth on this and say it doesn't legally matter one way or the other. I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but I have a couple of good ones who are. In just a second, let's get the latest on what's going on here and what the charges are back and forth from Jillian Turner in Washington. Jillian.
Morning, Neil. So President Trump's longtime lawyer and confidant, Michael Cohen, now claims his boss green-lighted that infamous Trump Tower meeting that's become a feature in the Mueller probe. The meeting took place on June 9th, 2016, and it included Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Kremlin lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. The president's son has long insisted his father had no knowledge of that meeting.
It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell.
The president offering his confirmation of that yesterday via tweet, saying, "I did not know of the meeting with my son, Don Jr." Sounds to me like someone's trying to make up stories in order to get himself out of an unrelated jam. Now, this comes just days after Cohen leaked a recording of a taped conversation he had with President Trump about hush money they paid to a Playboy model. Now, the president's inner circle is speaking out on the matter, and they're painting an unflattering portrait of Cohen. Rudy Giuliani telling CNN that Cohen, quote, lied to people and called him, quote, pathological. But some of President Trump's close friends seem to think Cohen poses a real threat.
I think it is a big deal. First of all, I think Michael Cohen represents a significant legal threat to the president. There's one consigliere. We all have one key person we tell all of our life story to. In President Trump's case, he trusted Michael Cohen. He was his fixer for many years.
Meanwhile, the trial of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort set to start in just a couple of days, and insiders anticipate that witnesses there will also be asked about this meeting. Neil?
Thank you very, very much. In the meanwhile, the fallout from all of this at a time when a lot of people are trying to understand, all right, let's say the president did know and did get a heads up on this meeting. Does that mean anything? Former intelligence analyst Morgan Ortegas, Democratic strategist Antoine Seawright, and Fox News legal analyst Mercedes Colvin. All right, Mercedes, you're a lawyer.
Yep.
Is there anything wrong with the president then having to reverse himself and say, I did mean it? He says that he did not know, not that he knew of this meeting.
Right.
outside of maybe misrepresenting it to the press? Worst case scenario, if that's
worst case scenario. There's nothing under oath. President Trump hasn't come forward under oath and said, I had nothing to do with this meeting, knew nothing about this meeting, no one spoke to me about this meeting. He tweeted it again. He tweeted it again. There's nothing under oath. So if he does turn around and 180-degree change and says, by the way, now I've recalled that there was something that I knew about the meeting. It wasn't clear to me the meeting was taking place, but maybe I thought about this meeting. Someone told me about this meeting. It's fine because there's nothing under oath, but it's different than the others.
Then it would matter than what's discussed at that meeting, Morgan, right? I mean, and I'm told Greg Jarrett has written a great book on this whole subject. You might be surprised to learn he doesn't buy the whole brouhaha over it. But what he was telling me was that it doesn't automatically mean collusion anyway. But we might get in the weeds of something we don't even know happened. But what do you think?
Well, I'm not a political operative, but I can tell you from a national security perspective and having worked in the space, the Russians did nothing to hide this meeting. There was nothing clandestine about this meeting. There was nothing covert about this meeting, right? They had it on Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue with, thousands of people walking past every day, television cameras, during the campaign. So it's interesting to me from
you
an
wouldn't know who those
perspective.
People are going in and out of.
No, you wouldn't know, but if you were going to do something like if you were going to have a vast conspiracy or collusion campaign, it would be a clandestine effort. And this was very out in the open. This was something that could have easily been noticed. And perhaps
what if the president didn't know about it?
He said that he hasn't, and I have every reason to believe my president, unless proven otherwise. And so far, all Michael Cohen has that we know of is his word against the president, and he has on Twitter and publicly defended Don Jr. and defended the president on this before he got in legal trouble.
Antoine, if you could just pipe down. You're
about to jump out.
What do you think?
Neil, I'm not a lawyer. I won't even pretend to play one on TV today. However, what I do know is that if this is true, if the takes are true, this will be another page in a catalog of lies by this president on the issue as it relates to Russia and every other thing you can imagine that he tends to lie about since he's taken office, whether it's Stormy Daniels, whether it's simple things like policy and getting the immigration bill done. He continues.
So you're linking where he denied payoffs to in the Stormy Daniels or this Playboy model, or that you link this. There's a pattern here.
And I know I'll get beat up by the crazies about this, but look, if you can't trust him on one thing, how can you trust someone on another? If you and
I used to say that about Bill Clinton.
Well, a lot of people don't trust Bill Clinton.
So my point is that do you think you're being fair here, though? Do you think, let's say the president didn't know about this, he denies it and tweeted again to Mercedes' point that he didn't know about it. So what? I'm trying to go to the next level. Let's say he did know about it.
If he did,
the next leap then is collusion.
If he did know about it, then that's where the important work of what the special prosecutor is doing. That's why that's so important. That's why he must continue. That's why the pressure must be relieved from him by the president and others saying, wrap up your investigation. This is all a witch hunt, because we cannot deny the fact that Russia hacked our elections. We cannot deny the fact that Russia and
he's now acknowledged that.
Trump continues to play footsie and cuddle and flirt with Putin for whatever reason. So we can't deny those things. So it's important for Republicans to take a deep breath, let the special prosecutor.
And Democrats, too, who deny that he hasn't been tough with Russia, right?
Right.
Yeah, well, he hasn't. So we have to continue to
from a policy perspective, Anthony has. I mean, just a couple days ago, Secretary Pompeo testified on the Hill, Neil, that we would continue the sanctions against Russia and that we would not tolerate or recognize what Russia has done invading Ukraine and Crimea. We are also aiding with military weapons to the Ukrainians, something that many of us pushed the Obama administration to do. I understand what you're saying from the rhetoric, but from a policy perspective, it actually is incredibly tough actions, policy actions against the Russians.
So from a policy standpoint, what we do know for a fact, based on the intelligence community, is that Russia is starting to play and setting themselves up to play in our elections again. What we do know is that the president of the United States stood on the world stage and essentially slapped the intelligence community in the face about Russia's meddling in the 2018 election. What we
but you will acknowledge the prior actions he's made were fairly tough.
Tough in comparison? No, I don't think so.
I have a quick question. What did the Obama administration do?
Calling out Putin for playing the elections, I consider that to be tough, right? Acknowledging
you don't know what was done behind closed doors either, right?
The world doesn't know. For all we know, Neil, he could have been, just
you don't know what's going on in a meeting at Trump Tower, but you're judging it. You don't know what happened behind closed doors, but you're judging it. You're not very fair, not very balanced.
I can only base the judgment on what he did on the world stage.
One thing I will say, though, Antoine, if the prosecutors are hanging their hat on Michael Cohen squarely on him, Good luck to them. And that's
I never said the prosecutor were.
Yeah, listen, I work at a firm with almost 1,000 lawyers. Everyone will like,
oh my God,
is there anybody ever taped a client? Of course not.
Why
So
is
there's
Michael Cohen such a bad person at this point?
I'm just saying that the prosecutor has to look way beyond that to see if there's circumstantial evidence that's around
it. What you and I both do not know is what the special prosecutor is doing. That's why I'm saying his work is important to continue. But I think it's ironic that the president will throw his troops under the bus when it's not convenient. When it's convenient.
I'm more fixated on Mercedes working with 1,000 lawyers.
Almost 1,000, I know. Can I bring him over?
That makes me a little nervous.
I want you to think.
You're a powerful woman, Mercedes.
Yeah, I want you to think of that. I'll have more after this. All right, this is a crisis that has now brought us a new term, fire tornadoes, ripping through Southern California as a lot of people are desperate to try to seek out safety and get out of this storm's way. Easier said than done. KTVU's Tom Bakar is in Shasta County, California, with the latest. Tom.
Well, the situation here is as follows. This is a big road that is usually very busy. It goes between Redding, a town of 95,000 people, and a little town out there called Igo of 625 people. But between here and there is a fire marching down the mountainside, threatening those houses there. And there are others that have already been destroyed in other parts of this fire. We look off to the right, the problem is this. In California, the problem is many, many people move into the mountains, which is called the wildland-urban interface, and that, believe it or not, you can't see it because of so much smoke, but there's definitely fire up in these mountains. Winds from the north blew it dangerously close to the little town of Igo, which was evacuated last night. At the moment, the winds are light, but dead trees from 5 years of drought and recent brush growth make California a tinderbox. The worry is that the fire might jump this very road, and firefighters are standing to protect evacuated property, and there's plenty of that. Property includes a lot of livestock. We've seen a horse rescue already this morning, and if the winds come up with this high temperature and low humidity, 5,000 homes will be threatened. So it is a confront the fire from two levels, and that is from the level of the air with an air force that's fighting this, and then, of course, the issue of the people on the ground that are facing it face to face. That is the situation right now. The fire is somewhere between 40 and 50,000 acres. We haven't gotten the latest figures yet, but probably closer to 50,000 acres at this point in time. Only 5% contained, and that means that this fire is pretty much raging out of control, and there's a whole lot of property standing in its way and a lot of dry brush and trees. Tom Bakar, Fox News.
Thank you, Tom, very, very much. We'll have a lot more on that, the fallout from that, because it's certainly putting a lot of pressure on our power grid, and that goes way beyond those affected in that area. More.
Still a chance here. It's Willingham.
Forget our elections. What if the Russians could monkey around with our power grid? Some evidence here that they are trying the fallout if they succeed, because in some cases they already are. Cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright. Morgan, what's going on here?
Look, the Russians are like salmon swimming upstream. It happens every year. They do it. It's part of their nature. It's all part of their plan to continue to cause disruption, make sure they've mapped out our vulnerabilities. I don't think we'll see a big attack, Neil, but what I think we'll see, you were just talking about the California wildfires. I think you'll start seeing nudges or certain things that at a time and place of their choosing when they want to cause disruption, like for an election, maybe midterms, this is all going to be part of their plan.
So I don't want you to give me a 101 on how you attack a power grid there, but what would show it? How would it evidence itself?
Same thing. If you go back and you take a look at what happened in Ukraine on December 23rd, 2015, biggest use of black energy, biggest loss of power at that time, 700,000 homes. You start seeing things like that. What you're going to see is in these control rooms. Hey, look, an easy way to do a 101 is look at the indictment of the 12 Russian intelligence officers that Mueller put out. They used the same tactics to go after these energy control rooms. So, look, it's just basic tradecraft stuff, but you'll see attacks. You'll see mapping out things called reconnaissance activities where they detect anomalous behavior in their network, and they start going, we think there's something in here. Well, yeah, there's something in there. They were very close to shutting off some of the power. They could have taken over the breakers.
All right, so you shut down, a power grid that connects a lot of utilities across a region, right, let's say, and apparently they're networked in nefarious ways here, but easily, sabotageable, I guess.
Yes.
So you hit a power grid. What would go out along the way?
Look, that's the one thing. I don't think they've really gamed it out to say exactly what would happen, but you'd have these series of cascading events. For example, we know one of the things that happens when the heat goes up. I was just out in Phoenix, 114 degrees. They've got a massive impact on their power grid. If you have one thing goes out, you have the most vulnerable people in our society, the elderly, maybe people in nursing homes, places to where heat does kill people. So you're going to have these heat-related deaths. You'll have an impact on public safety, on services. The biggest thing you'll have is you'll start creating unrest in the society, a little bit of chaos. And we know what happens. If you want to take out a nation, as we've seen in war or terrorist activities, go after power, go after water. If you go after our power, you start affecting a lot of the things that we've come to depend on, everything from communications to our banking to, don't want to create such a doomsday scenario, but think of one thing that doesn't require power to operate.
So one of the things I've learned with our grid is it's sort of strung together. A lot of people think that it's a sophisticated network of utilities and all of that.
Right.
But when one goes out, it's sort of like, a limb that goes out and another limb that goes out. And then before you know it, you're in intensive care. And we're vulnerable to that because these have not been fixed, addressed, or even updated. In some cases, I think in Northern California, I was reading, in decades. So then what?
Well, look, back in March, I wrote an article at The Hill about how Russia, this is a warm-up for them. If you want to see what's happening again, watch what's happening in Ukraine. What you're going to see is, example, what happened, I think it was back in 2004 when we had the massive power outage. You guys were hit with it in New York.
Right, I remember.
Guess where it started? Ohio. It started in Ohio and worked all its way out and took out a large chunk of New York City. Now, have they made progress? Yes, they have. But if we're still falling victim to the same three-card Monte trick, which is they're using spear phishing, they're taking over accounts. This network that we're talking about in the DHS report was supposed to be air-gapped. In other words, the front office wasn't supposed to be connected to the systems that run the power. How did they get into it? The same way that the Target hack happened. They used third parties, like the HVAC vendors. They had people that had remote control software installed. So we still, for all the money they've spent and they haven't learned that lesson, man, I'll tell you, that's a waste of money. They could have spent half of that and just done some basic stuff and be 10 times farther than where they are right now.
But wouldn't the Russians know more people than ever are watching them, the more are clued in that they want to do something, so they'd be extra cautious if they do it at all?
Yeah, you're not, like I said, you're not going to see them swinging for the bleachers, but what you're going to see are little things, little nudges, things just to continue to cause disruption, low-intensity conflict in cyberspace. They're not going to launch an all-out war, but as long as they can keep you distracted and looking at over here, it's like the people the magicians who are really illusionists. It's deception. Look over here while the magic is happening over here on the right. That's what they're looking to do, and obviously they're going to continue to try and influence elections. Microsoft found 3 places in the midterms where the Russians were involved in trying to clear McCaskill from Missouri. One of her accounts, I believe, was targeted.
Incredible. Morgan, thank you. I think. Morgan Wright. We got Congressman Darrell Issa coming up. I wonder what he thinks of this. I'm a farmer who doesn't like this trade war that's building and getting worse.